Tekken has been peerlessly important to my development as a fan of video games and action-oriented media in general. I'll never forget coming across a Tekken 3 arcade machine on my way out of a movie with my dad when I couldn't have been older than 5, being drawn to choose the outlandish and badass-looking King, and being entranced by the one-on-one combat being presented to me. Something about two combatants facing one another in an arena of pure and unfiltered fisticuffs was so magical, and since then, into this very day, the fighting game remains my favorite genre of video game. You'd think with such a significant history, my love for Tekken would be undying to this day, but this isn't the case. My adoration for the series peaked with Tekken 5, which came out when I was 7 years old and burst at the seams with everything I saw in Tekken, and then Tekken 6 and 7 came along and simply failed to reignite that same passion within me. And for a long time I figured I had just grown out of it, as people do, but replaying the original 5 Tekken games that I first fell in love with recently, I deduced that this couldn't be true, because I felt just as impassioned by Tekken as I did when I was a little kid when I played them today. Was this sheer nostalgia, or has Tekken truly changed? I decided to perform a little exploration about this. In my reflections, I ultimately came to the conclusion that what made Tekken and its characters and universe so appealing was a two-part formula of sorts that I feel is no longer adhered to. That being a character's fighting style and their motivation, two important elements that combine to make a character truly fully fledged and right at home in Tekken's world, which focuses on the King of Iron Fist tournament, a martial arts tournament held by the Mishima Zaibatsu, an absurdly powerful corporation headed by the martial arts legend Heihachi Mishima. Fighters of all shapes and sizes gather for a shot at Heihachi's prize money, the glory that comes with the prize, and in some cases, Heihachi's very spot at the top, sought by series lead and Heihachi's son, Kazuya Mishima, with whom Heihachi has very bad blood. Tekken's overarching plot surrounds the blood feud of the Mishima-Kazama blended family and their quarrel for supremacy, as well as uncovering the mystery of the cursed devil genetics found in the Mishimas, which become a sought-after power and deadly MacGuffin throughout the series. The rest of the cast comes from every walk of life, and following their change of motivation throughout the series isn't unlike following the ups and downs of a real-life sports star. A majority of the fighters return from game to game, with a background reflecting the aftermath of their previous tournament attempt. Be it money, fame, or revenge, the various fighters felt very personal as combatants. Rather than follow a linear story, you picked a character and fought through their tier of opponents in the tournament before witnessing their personal ending, and the games did a great job connecting the player to the motive of their selected fighter. When you picked Hwoarang, you understood being driven to desert military duty to pursue a rival, and when you picked Armor King, you understood the desire he felt to help his close friend regain his sportsmanship from the depths of alcoholism. I'll never forget familiarizing myself with Christy Monteiro, the beautiful and skilled capoeira fighter who, under her graceful fighting style and confident bluster, was fighting in the tournament for prize money with which she could cure her terminally ill grandfather, making me feel genuinely bad for defeating her when the AI controlled her in any given gameplay. Whether it's desire to prove their skills, to meet a rival, or an external goal that can be achieved with any money or fame, the characters of Tekken had reason to fight that made you feel a sportsmanly relationship with a lifeless computer controller. And seeing how they fall back and get back up between each game and find a new reason to fight despite past losses was always insanely inspiring. This point of view made Tekken's characters feel like athletes in a genuine struggle not between good or evil, but to decide who is the strongest and who gets the glory and fortune that goes with it. Lee's wish to outshine his brother by adoption, King wanting to avenge the death of his master that occurred in a bar brawl, the Williams sisters' never-ending rivalry because they accused one another of killing their father. These were all stories I feel so much connection to because of how the wins and losses between each half of each rivalry reverberates into the next installment of Tekken, making the fighters feel like tangible champions at their best and sympathetic underdogs at their low point. But this excitement and admiration I felt for the various characters bizarrely disappeared the more was revealed about the story of Tekken 6. Tekken 6 opens with the Mishima Zaibatsu being taken over not by Kazuya Mishima, but by his son Jin Kazama, who immediately rolls out the dangerous path of a warlord, using his new resources and power to wipe out anyone that would dare stand in his way and, in short, start a new world war. This motivates a new tournament and means for all fighters to gather once more, but what felt different was how central Jin, Kazuya, and Heihachi's feud was to the story of this game, and by extension, even more of its characters. Said conflict was always the central set piece and focus of the series, but it was also a call to sport for other characters to settle their own conflicts, not to further fuel a single one. Newcomers included Leo and Miguel, who are motivated by crimes of war committed by Kazuya and Jin, and they enter the tournament seeking revenge on them. This is fine motivation, but it also makes these new fighters feel less like athletes passionate about martial arts, and more like bystanders who would have never been drawn to compete if not for the plot coming to them. It seemed more and more like a huge populace of Tekken 6 and 7's characters, new and returning, could be easily categorized into those who liked and hated Jin, Kazuya, and Heihachi, and which side they were on in their grand family feud. Anyone who wasn't involved in this conflict fell to the wayside, and received increasingly irrelevant closure born of lack of focus. And the personal connection to the fighters felt on so many levels in past games disappeared. Note how Mortal Kombat excels at a linear story with every character involved centrally, but does so because Mortal Kombat's conflict is very strictly a side of good against one of evil, meaning it benefits from a streamlined story, whereas Tekken always felt more like a rivalry-fueled sports story, where characters felt more like shades of gray competing with one another. Splitting them into sides of a war, I feel, drains them of that nuance. Feng Wei is a bad guy who trashes dojos and grievously injured the grandfather of Asuka Kazama, who seeks to fight him in the tournament to get to revenge. But he's a competitor like any other who seeks no worldwide ill will by winning, so it's hard to say he's truly on the dark side of any spectrum. All of the characters, good or bad of nature, were all just competitors in a tournament that gathers all walks of life. The stories of martial law's failing restaurant business he was fighting to keep afloat, Steve Fox's existential rage, born of his unnatural and non-consensual parentage, and Craig Marduk's disgrace from the World Federation of Vale Tudo were wiped away in favor of mysterious conspiracies and war that felt almost soap operatic at times. This is perhaps in no way summed up better than by Tekken 7's replacement for the usual arcade towers, the character episodes, which are gradually unlocked by progressing in the main story mode that focuses on Heihachi and allows you to witness an individual character story. Sadly, contrary to the gauntlet of battles culminating in a climactic rival encounter that each Tekken fighter was treated to before, the character episodes consist of one combatic encounter, sometimes even casual in nature, before being closed out with a cutscene that usually plays for laughs and doesn't feel as satisfying punctuating a single fight, as opposed to a whole tournament's worth, essentially robbing Tekken of what made its relatively simple story layout so easy to return to and be engaged with. Meanwhile, the motivation shifting from personal to less so has really worked in detriment to the series' newly introduced characters. Perhaps I wouldn't be so baffled by the existence of Lucky Chloe if I only had to accept that J-pop Idol was among a fighting tournament, but I also have to wrap my head around the fact that Kazuya Mishima, of all people, wanted to enlist her services, and that she somehow benefits from this position. I don't feel like I've taken down someone with the tenacity to pursue their goal when I fight these characters. I feel I've tackled a pawn in an ongoing conflict between the G Corporation and Mishima Zaibatsu. But this was just one half of the huge blow taken to my love for Tekken. When I reflect on Tekken, it was not simply the games that I felt engaged in, but the authentic martial arts represented. The cast of Tekken was built on archetypes of legitimate fighting styles, to the point that spending enough time as a character taught you a thing or two about their choice of martial arts simply by example. Each character's fighting style was clearly documented in their information, and usually integral to their backstory. Karate, Jeet Kune Do, kickboxing, arts of all shapes and sizes were seen. The character's fighting style felt so distinct and telling that it almost felt like a shorthand in place of other fighting games having superpowers tell of a character. Rather than the fire guy and the ice guy, you had practitioners of ninjutsu and Chinese kenpo, which would be a foreign concept to many, but quickly conveyed itself in gameplay and spoke volumes of each character. In the case of fans similar to myself, it was this emphasis that got me interested in martial arts. Before my vocation was consumed by my choice to pursue theater, I took youth-oriented taekwondo classes out of admiration of the fighters of Tekken. The characters of Tekken didn't have undead spears shooting out of their hands or car-destroying fireballs. They were certainly exaggerated and even at times superhuman, but the moves you had at your disposal were genuine martial arts that made the ensemble seen in Tekken feel more like sports stars you could strive to resemble than impossible superheroes. And the fact that a principle like this got a kid like me and several others to be enthusiastic about exercise is amazing. In Tekken's earlier years, fighting style is important in both a sense of character and narrative. Note how Jin Kazama abandoned the Kazama traditional style in favor of karate when he became disillusioned with his family legacy, speaking to how central one's choice of fighting style is to their identity. By proxy of placing a martial art before any other defining trait, I've heard some complaints from newcomers that the cast of Tekken comes off as bland and indistinct, making it hard to choose a character for the first time, and I can understand this grievance completely, but I don't think placing a martial art as the foundation of a character is at all a bad thing, as Tekken has demonstrated time and time again that just because one's fighting style is their main trait, this does not make it their one defining quality. Take Paul Phoenix, who's a judo practitioner defined in combat by his brash personality and battle cries, matched well by his powerful stomps and overwhelming grappling. However, in story cutscenes outside of combat, there's a great deal more underneath his brash judo and how he relates to it. Paul has an adoration of motorcycles and a fascination with aliens to boot, wishing to fight beings from other worlds to prove himself the strongest. Paul is a fully realized character with dreams and hobbies outside of fighting, and in a more outlandish series, I could easily picture him having attacks where he gets on his motorcycle and runs you over, or summons a UFO to attack, but in a battle of Tekken, he relies strictly on his skills as a judo champion, just as the other fighters rely almost strictly on their practice as sportsmen and martial artists. Jun Kazama is shown to be very naturally inclined and loves interacting with forest animals in her downtime, but she would never have an attack where she summons a deer to ram her opponent, just as it'd be easy for a character like Lei Wulong of the vocation of police officer to pull out his gun he's been seen using in some of his cutscenes, but Tekken had a clear desire to showcase the martial arts these characters have practiced. There's a clear line between a character's livelihood and passion as a martial artist, and their lives outside of that, which makes them interesting and relatable, but also more like athletes in a craft that can be observed rather than, well, video game characters. None of this is to say it's bad to have characters with outlandish powers or the like in fighting games. I say all of this as a fan of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter as well as Tekken, but the realistic and sporting quality of Tekken's purely hand-to-hand style gave it a niche and place to stand out within the spectrum of the genre. The characters' authentic skills combined with their motivations made them feel standout among the community of other fighters. There's a fluid, fast-paced style to martial arts like Lei's Five Forms Kung Fu and the Chang family's Xing Yi that makes battle in Tekken feel like brutal dances of competition. Sometimes fighting style is all a character does have to speak for themselves, and that's enough. Like the Russian commando Sergei Dragunov, a mute, gaunt-looking fighter, but one who practices combat sambo, an involved grappling style that speaks to his discipline and dedication to his position as a military agent, as sambo is a traditional self-defense, are used to train the likes of combatants in military units. Those familiar with Tekken, I'm sure, are already rushing to correct me and point out that mainstay characters such as Yoshimitsu and Kuma are by no means realistic, as I've been praising the classic cast for, and the fact that the boss battles and plot surrounding the likes of Devil and Ogre undermine the authentic sportsmanship I've prattled on about for so long, to which I would respond by saying that these are exceptions that prove the rule. After fighting so many familiarly human opponents, it's important an outlier stand in your way next, be it a straight-up grizzly bear or an otherworldly laser-shooting devil. Once you prove you're the best among your peers, the only way to truly prove your tenacity and care for your goal is to utilize your skill and take on something truly otherworldly. This divide is what gave Tekken that extra bite, to act as a cherry on top of the experience. Before you get the prize money to fund your dojo or revitalize the forests of the world, you must put your goal on the line in the face of impossible odds. As the focus shifted from the Shima Zaibatsu power struggle, so did incentive for increasingly powerful and perhaps gimmicky new characters, and those rare, impossible odds began to feel consistent and downright mundane. The almost true-to-life martial arts felt pushed to the back in favor of robot girls with wings and chainsaws, magic-wielding exorcists, and genetically engineered Bane knockoffs. And at the risk of speaking for too many people at once, I have a hard time imagining someone playing Tekken 7 and witnessing these less specific and unrealistic fighting styles, and itching to learn more about the culture surrounding them or practicing them in real life. Athletes like Ronda Rousey have credited fighting games for being their inspiration for becoming a champion in real life, and yet there are no rec center classes to emulate vague descriptions of fighting styles like freestyle dance acrobatics, destructive impulse, or exorcism sorcery, which were used to define the styles of Tekken 7's new characters in place of actual martial arts that can be strived for and practiced. Like I said before, outlandish and even impossible characters have always been in Tekken, but they were outliers to complement everyone else, and I feel Tekken 6 and 7 made them closer to the norm. It's always fun to play as Kuma because it's ridiculous to do so on principle. But how ridiculous is it to truly enter a martial arts ring with a bear when his peers have become cybernetic Metal Gear Raiden wannabes and aspiring J-pop idols? Tekken stopped feeling like a game about martial artists proving their skill and comparing the qualities of their styles that make up their livelihood, but rather about characters picking up martial arts as a means to participate in a worldwide conflict that feels so impersonal compared to the stories before, where fighting style was once a point of pride and invaluable identity to these characters, to the point that a character altering their fighting style was a turning point of the story. It's now an afterthought, robbing Tekken of many things that made it stand out in years before, becoming another clash between opposing sides in a war of supernatural characters. And I feel this is kind of the crux where the two factors I've been talking up come together. The first 5 Tekken games weave fighting style and story so masterfully that even someone with no prior experience in the topic felt the importance. Jin making the choice to discard his old fighting style for a new one because he wanted to win on his own terms, Paul Phoenix training harder and harder in judo to defeat his eternal rival Puma, Baek Do-san, a disgraced taekwondo master using his skills to fend off an attempt at blackmail hanging over his head. Just these small summaries make me feel so much more than J-pop star fighting because she likes Kazuya and big monster fighting because the company that made him wanted it to. Tekken feels far less personal in both of these aspects, and that's what caused me to really fall far from the series. Ultimately, none of this is to say that just because Tekken has recently taken a direction I wouldn't have taken, it doesn't mean it's all gone down the gutter or has done nothing great in recent years. The games themselves are still rather fun to play, and as critical as I am of the newly introduced fighters, the likes of Fighting Star on his way to redemption Bob and Savat Badass Katarina feel like they would still fit right into the original Tekken trilogy among a few others. For that matter, as much as I dislike how all-consuming the Mishima saga became in Tekken 7, the narrative of the conflict's ending in of itself was cathartic, and acted as a perfect send-off for a longtime favorite, Heihachi Mishima. And with the newly introduced Leroy Smith and Faku Ram placing great emphasis on fighting style and the culture surrounding it, introduced shortly after Tekken 7 put a close to the Mishima saga, part of me wonders if Tekken, in its more authentic and martial art focused glory, is due for a return. I suppose time can only tell.